The history of this feast is linked very much with the Franciscan order, and as it happens, with where I was sent on a weekly basis shortly after ordination. You've seen this around, and if you go to Tuscany, to the area where I was there, you'll see this everywhere. Chiseled on the lintels of houses, all over the place, you'll see it. And indeed, in different parts of Italy, it is the monogram of the Holy Name. Now, this saint started off as a hidden, devoted young man who gave much energy to looking after people who were dying by the dozen, by the hundred, of the bubonic plague towards the end of the 1400s in Siena. Here he is. This, by the way, is a true painting done by Francesco, a friend of mine in Italy who was a painter, and it's authenticated behind as a true likeness, for we know actually what he looked like. We have a contemporary bust and painting, so it is actually like that he looked, emaciated from penance. Now, this young man, after looking after his aunt until she died, decided to give his life to the Lord. And that meant that he entered the monastery of the Colombaio near where we were. It's now a ruin. But it's in Seggiano, which is precisely the church I was given to look after ordination. And there he grew in prayer, grace, and sanctity. His first Mass after ordination was there where I used to go on a weekly basis, and the relics of that saint were in the church of St. Bernardino there, one of the churches in the village, still used on a monthly basis. Otherwise it was in the main parish church every Sunday. Now, this man eventually, rather like St. Padua, who was also Anthony of Padua, who was also Franciscan, turned out unexpectedly to have a gift. One of the greatest preachers of all time. And it was quite unexpected, for his voice was weak and frail. But it seems that he was given a supernatural force which he also was able to cultivate as the years went by, which meant that he became the foghorn of Italy. He would go around, initially in the area of Tuscany, and he would draw crowds by the thousand. In Siena itself, the men would be on that half of the huge campo and the women on the other about 2 hours before he started to get room. And it just happens that one person who was good at taking notes, shorthand, wrote down quite a few of his sermons, so we know exactly what he said. And it's very powerful stuff. He would say things like this: those who do this and that and the other will go to what he called Casa Calda, hothouse. And he would go into all the modes of, entertainment, mimicking and acting and producing effects. So it was actually entertainment as well, which is interesting, like an early Fulton Sheen. The result was that invitations came from all over Italy, and the Lord put on his heart to clean up Italy of a big fault. Hence this. Still to this day, unfortunately, Tuscany is one of the worst. They use these holy names of Jesus and Mary a lot. Now look, why should that happen? The people themselves quite often are not fully aware of it, and it's the case in Ireland when they use a toned-down version of the holy name. But the demon is not unaware of it, so what does he do? Every time there is an abuse of the holy name or of the name of Mary, he is gratified. So he pushes, and by now he has huge means of pushing. the soaps. They transmit a norm, a vocabulary, a lingua which is the lingua franca of vulgarity. To have muscles and virility, one needs to be a hard swearer. To make a point, one needs to bring God into it. Well, is it true? Strangely enough, in school, when we were about 14, our English teacher, who was also the RI teacher, we used to call him Copperbonds because he had red hair, he was a Welshman. He said, with regard to this, he was going into the rights and wrongs of it, but he just said this to finish. I'm not condoning it, but it's a lazy use of language, falling back on the vulgar and the sacred. He was inviting us to be cultivated, cultured people, able to make a point with rich vocabulary. It's far more powerful, actually. What do we do if someone around us is using the holy name? Is there an obligation to interfere and to correct? Well, I would propose this to you. If one is in a situation where, on a daily basis, one is actually exposed to regular and frequent abuse of the holy name, and specifically that, one has the right, once, with great gentleness, and without aggressing or teaching or making a lesson, saying on a personal level, I would prefer if you used some other expression. Do what you like with your conscience, but it affects also mine, because it's your business too, when it's regular and all the time. Then you have done your duty. All you can do after that is actually make reparation. And Joe Dalton found that. He was in office working, and there was a lot of abuse of the holy name. So he brought it to the Lord in prayer. He was given to understand this. Every time you hear it, say in your heart words to the effect of, praised and glorified be the holy name of Jesus by all angels and men. And so he found that in the course of the year, strangely enough, it was going down and down and down. And he calculated from around 100 a day, it was down to about 5 or 1 or 2 in the day, because every time God was being glorified and no one was being insulted or aggressed. The other, vulgarity, is something also to be looked at. We are at home, in that case, with the vulgar, the dirty. We're making of sacred departments of life, which involve the Blessed Trinity, procreation, things which are of the demon and of the flesh, bringing the beauty of God's creation down to the mud. Look at the box, the television, look at the pub culture. All that's discussed after a certain hour in the Guinness land of Ireland, often in the pubs, is the vulgar, or something linked to it, and in a very vulgar way quite often, especially when it's well lubricated. It's not a good way to spend your evenings. Eventually, they asked if he would become Bishop of Siena. He said no. Later he was preaching somewhere else. They asked if he would become Bishop of Ferrara. He said no. Eventually he was preaching somewhere else. They asked if he would become Bishop of Urbino. He said no. He also said no to hearing confessions, because if he knew if he were in the box, he would not be able to preach. He knew he had a specific gift from the Lord, and he would preach for hours and hours on end, until eventually at Aquila, on the way to Naples, he petered out after his 50th sermon in a 50-day period, and a sermon meant 2 hours of preaching. Burnt out in 1444, and from then on, very soon, the Franciscans began to celebrate the Feast of the Holy Name. Pope Innocent the 13th in 1721 extended it to this Sunday for all the Church. It was done away with in the calendar of 1969, and a few years ago it was brought back as an optional memorial in the new calendar on the 3rd of January, with readings and everything. Beautiful one for the vigils, matins, and I think it's actually St. Bernardino. Which brings me to something else. When we have recourse to bad language, it's under duress quite often. It's the safety valve for handling an emergency. Look at people's reactions when things go wrong. Very often at that point, bad words come out. Is it not true? At least in the mind, and very often also in the mouth. Now, I just want to handle for a few seconds this question of coping with duress, coping with high tension. One thing that enhances, unfortunately, tension is haste. Now look at this. This is Old Father Time. And actually this one is correct, bang on. Do you know why? It's a radar clock, so it knows more than we do. It'll tell you the time. Now this is calmly going on, second by second, and you actually see the seconds passing. You can see them jumping, and that moves slightly each time, and that makes a tick every second. And during each second, about 2 souls go into the beyond, I think, on average. Now, that, in the course of this year, will continue to go round at the same speed. If you are at this point, and have got to be at that point in those seconds, what will you do? You'll get flustered. You'll do things badly. You'll lose your cool and your calm. Now, little by little, that can be brought down in such a way that one is not spending the hours fighting against this, but sitting upon it, resting upon it as it goes. Life can be calm or pressurized. One trick is this: don't do too much. Leave out what no one has asked you to do sometimes, so as to actually enter into mode of resting on the present moment. It's not worth it. Which brings me to the third point. Punctuality means being on the point, the punctum. It is good to be punctual, to start the celebrations at the right time, to be in class at the right time. So we do that by making sure that we leave out things which don't have to be done just before, so we get there calmly. But, having said that, things will get in the way of being punctual. What do? Now, at that point, the important thing is to look at the issue under study. It is not the all-important thing always to be on the point, the exact second. If, for instance, charity is jettisoned, the person who comes to you is sent by divine providence at that point. So you concentrate that point by loving the person coming to you as though you were not more interested in the clock than in that person. Do not be dismissive. There are ways of gently giving them what they need and then coming back to them calmly, but never hurt because of punctuality. There are ways and means of treating people as tabernacles of the living God or throwing them in the dustbin, and people feel the difference. Last point. This is the unpacked present that we have this year. That bit at the bottom. Years ago, it would have been round about 1981. We were in recreation in the monastery in France, and the novice master at the beginning of the year showed one of these and went like this: L'année passera comme ça. And he lifted one after the other and showed time passing before our eyes before it passed. A lesson to think, for pass it will, just as this will go round as it will. So before we pass with these days, let's think, what must I do to make sure that these moments pass well? I would say just one clue. It would be enough for today, but if you master it, it will be good. Learn the art of calm. For if you go through the seconds calmly, you will not ruin them.